You can bear with us, colleagues. Thanks.
Please hear.
Hello? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Dr. Pieperkorn has joined us from WHO. That said, I think we could start our regular press briefing. Today, the 12th of December, I'd like to welcome you all to this all virtual meeting. We are resorting to this format exceptionally today, given the many goings on here at Geneva and hopefully facilitating your work. However, we want to make sure we have a sharp focus on the situation in the field, particularly situation in Gaza. We're very pleased to have back with us today Dr. Richard Pieperkorn, who you know well, the WHO representative on the occupied Palestinian territory, speaking from Gaza. I think maybe Christian, if Christian's online, maybe you'd like to start off if there's something you wanted to add before we turn to Dr. Pieperkorn. Christian.
Well, thank you very much, Rolando. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, great to have Dr. Richard Pieperkorn available today. We sent out a press release just this morning, so the updates are really hot, and glad to have him right here. As you know, he's talking from Gaza, so the connection might be unstable. He warned us before, so we'll see how far we get. We'll also try to share any specific talking points, at least the main figures or names of hospitals, whatever we're talking about, so that you have those in writing as soon as we can share. And with that, thank you very much, and back to you, Rolando.
Great, thank you, Christian. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. Start on the hospital functionality and everything related to that. I understand the press statement came out just now, so I'm sure we'll getting some questions on that as well. But let's focus first on the functionality. And in just 66 days, the health system has gone from 36 functional hospitals to 11 partially functional hospitals. So 1 in the north and 10 in the south. So again, from 36 to 1 in the north and 10 in the south. The 4 minimal functional in the north are Ashaba, Shifa, barely, and you've heard stories about Ada and Kamal Adwan. I don't think we can call them functional at the moment, or even not even barely functional. So besides that, just 29% of primary healthcare functional facilities are functional. And I want to describe a little bit what we saw. I'm here now more than 2 weeks and visited most of the hospitals in the south where WHO delivered essential medical and trauma supplies, essential medicines, but also to the north and to our recent visit on 9 December to Al-Ahli Arabi Hospital, also formerly known as the Baptist Hospital, I think it's in north of Gaza. First of all, north of Gaza, I know this very well. I come there every month, a week. It looks like a wasteland. I mean, it's the devastation, devastation is simply enormous. We were still surprised that we saw so many people actually on the streets and lying on the streets, children, men, women, etc., coming out, surprised that we had this convoy of PRCS ambulances, the UN, 2 UN vehicles, 1 WHO, the other with OCHA and UNDSS, and of course a truck full with medical supplies. Al-Ahli is basically the only partially functional hospital in the north, and many people, I mean, I know that hospital is a relatively small hospital. The situation is completely different, and I can tell you, I worked 7.5 years in Afghanistan. I've seen some grim scenes in after blast in Helmand, in the emergency trauma hospital in Kandahar, Kabul, etc. But I've never seen scenes like this actually in my life. So it's usually an 80-bed hospital, but given the resources available, it's only realistically capable of treating 40. Yet there were more than 250 patients, and we saw many. The hospital grounds are also full of IDPs and full of people. And we saw many patients turned up, many trauma patients up on donkey carts, on horse carts, etc. Dead people, unfortunately, seriously injured people on foot, personal vehicles, everywhere. Every room at the moment in Al-Ahli, so not only every ward, but every corridor, in the courtyard, outside, the library, even the chapel is full with patients. And you can only describe it as a kind of utter chaos and a humanitarian disaster zone. The building, of course, had already sustained damages because of the hostilities. We talked to the hospital staff we know well, Dr. Fadel, the orthopedic surgeon, and Dr. Mohammed Rawan, who came from Indonesian hospital actually to support. He supports the general surgeon. And they listed out similarly as we hear everywhere, the lack of the shortage of fuel, oxygen, essential medical supplies, as well as a lack of food and water for patients and health workers. Specifically our OT operations and the trauma kits were immediately removed from the truck and brought to the sterilization room of the still functional operation theater. The staff capacity is minimum, specifically the nursing care. The hospital at the moment is heavily relying on volunteers, and I must say they do an amazing job, but because the patients everywhere, and many of them really serious, they hardly receive let's say the nursing care they should receive. So faced with this huge number of patients everywhere on the streets, outside, and all wards, the doctors are really forced to prioritize who receives care, who doesn't, and they're treating many of the serious cases actually straight away in the corridors or on the floor or even on the chapel. As I said, severely short-staffed, and it's looking. Unfortunately, there's no vascular surgeon, so that's why the medical specialists, they are forced something to do. Limb amputations are decided as the last resort to save life. And visited again, we brought in medical goods in Nasser Medical Complex and described the incredible congested and I would say horrific situation there on the trauma ward, but Al-Ahli beats everything. European Gaza, Al-Najjar, Al-Aqsa, and it is sadly to say, we hear the similar stories. Yesterday, we were at Al-Aqsa Hospital, which is in the middle area. This is, I would say, still one of the better functional hospitals. Also there, normally the hospital for 200 patients, currently over 600. Thousands of IDPs also camping in the hospital grounds. And the hospital still functioned relatively well because they had a number of medical specialists and medical doctors coming from the north assisting. They still had a number of nursing staff, and they still kept going. They raised the same issues, by the way, that their staff is also completely preoccupied, of course, by the safety of their family, and so they cannot always concentrate on their job. Enormous needs to expand beds and the bed capacity, and beyond, Al-Aqsa would like to set up, with assistance of partners, an additional bed capacity of 200 beds close by. There is some emerging medical teams now moving in, and there's some promising plan. ICRC moving with and planning an additional capacity of 150 beds in the European Gaza hospital. Of course, there's already Emiratis and the Jordan field hospital, MSF, with some emerging medical teams. As WHO, we try to get more in and coordinate. And this is what we should focus on. All the efforts must be made to keep the remaining hospitals functional and urgently protect and restore the health system. Now I'm only talking about hospitals and mainly focusing on the trauma cases. We have to get the primary healthcare system and the linkages between primary healthcare systems and hospital care functional again. Because, of course, most patients, as we always see, they go to basic health service. They will need basic healthcare services. We think about reproductive, maternal, and child health, emergency obstetric cares, non-communicable diseases, and specifically diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, oncology, and, of course, mental health and psychosocial support. So the whole area. I want to leave it here as an introduction and describe a little bit the situation specifically up north in Al-Aqsa Hospital. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And I think I'm going to turn back to Christian. I think Christian has a additional comment to make. Christian, over to you.
No, I was thank you. I was offering to read out the statement, but I understand that Rick has limited time available.
Okay.
So let's maximize that. And Rick, if you agree, I would then read the statement that we sent after you're done with your Q&A, and let's use Q&A now for you because you're not always available.
Right. All right. Thanks. That's thank you. That's the practical approach. Thank you very much, Christian. Okay. In that case, let's turn to questions. We have 2 questions thus far. Emma from Reuters. Over to you, Emma.
Good morning. I was wondering if you could give us an overview of how bad the spread of diseases is and what it means for the sick that the healthcare system is overwhelmed with all these trauma injuries. Are these people being neglected? And do you have any estimate for how many have been killed from diseases, not bombs? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let me start with I think the question, of course, on communicable disease, infectious diseases, and outbreaks. UNRWA and UNRWA Health Facility, Ministry of Health, technical partners of the Ministry of Health, has together with WHO tried to get an assessment as good as possible. I mean, even over the 2 weeks I'm here, and in the Rafah area, and made all these trips up north and everywhere, there is an enormous influx of IDPs. And I think Gaza is probably one of the few areas where as a refugee you become an IDP. And specifically here, the Rafah area, which is, I think, normally a city of 280,000, and must harbor more than 1 million now. I mean, even everywhere around us, every day, you've seen this growing. And the UNRWA shelters are completely full and overwhelmed, but you see everywhere makeshift shelters around the streets, on every street. And Rafah is teeming with people everywhere around the street. So just to give some figures, we're looking, of course, on acute respiratory infections, and since start, you've seen more than 165,000 cases. Diarrhea, this, of course, under 5 years, we see more than 60,000 cases, and that is, I believe, something like 4 or 5 times much more, like 40 times as much as we see in normal time during this year. Diarrhea over 5 years as well, over 60,000. Skin diseases, lice, over 25,000. Skin rashes, and impetigo, chickenpox, and meningitis. We also saw cases of jaundice, and these are all syndromic case managements. And of course, with jaundice, you think, is it hepatitis A or is it hepatitis E, which is much more serious? So we try to get in mobile labs and check on that, and also we try to refer samples. That is not yet in place. Overall, if you look at fatalities, I mean, like they're now standing at over 18,000, of which more than 60% is women and children, and injuries 50,000, and displaced over 1.9 million people. Now, on the trauma cases, no, they're not neglected. I think the hospitals, although the hospital system is on its knees, they do whatever they can do. And specifically in the southern areas, where we've seen a lot of we see, of course, multiple traumas. We see spinal injuries. We see there's a lot of burns and skin and need for skin grafts, etc. And we never even discussed that, the impacts of this enormous flow of injured people. So talking about close to 50,000 injured people, the impacts it will have on their future and their family lives. In Al-Ahli, I described the situation, which is so unfortunate that there is no vascular surgeon, and that sometimes the medical specialist there, they have to go over to amputation to save lives. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. I just take note that Christian has dropped some figures in the chat, some disease figures as of the 10th of December. So do take note of that. Jeremy, if you don't mind, I think Emma, you have a follow-up perhaps to your earlier question. So maybe let's go back to Emma, then back to Jeremy afterwards. Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, just quickly to clarify, I think you said fatalities of 80,000. Is that from disease? Could you just clarify that figure? Thank you.
I think this is, and I must say, you must have seen the figures. I mean, like they've been, these are the reported figures on fatality. Yeah, 18,205, current 11 December, and injuries 49,645.
Thanks for that clarification. We'll take a question now from Jeremy of Radio France Internationale. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Pipakon, I'd like you to mention what happened to the UN staff on the way to Al-Ali. I understand that one of the members of the staff was arrested twice on the way back and forth, and was detained and beaten. And can you specify, because on your communique it doesn't say that it is the Israeli armed forces that arrested him. We all understand that it's the Israeli armed force, but it doesn't really specify in the communique. So just can you explain what happened basically?
Okay, yeah, let me explain as well. Well, first of all, I think you will also see this reflected in the statement. And as an overall point, I want to make that the space for humanitarian actors to provide aid within Gaza is incredibly complex, and it seems to be shrinking, and it is very difficult for us to safely and swiftly move supplies, patients, and staff. And the needs are enormous to alleviate this catastrophic humanitarian situation, which is only growing. So we are, as WHO, definitely committed to stay and deliver. We're doing everything possible to support, and also the other agencies, humanitarians around. And again, I want to specifically call out to support UNRWA on this. Now, we we have carried out multiple missions actually, and extremely difficult conditions. And the latest, I would say, very complex one, the one yesterday in Al-Aqsa, was relatively easy. Latest complex one to Al-Ahli in Gaza City. And I forgot to mention that. So we also managed, we were with 6 PRCS vehicles and PRCS staff because they are our key and trusted partner. And besides bringing in the needed essential medical supplies, we also were there to transfer critical patients, and we were planning to transfer 12 critical patients. Finally, very much facilitated and supported and managed by PRCS with the WHO team. 19 critical patients and 14 companions were actually were taken from Al-Ahli to Nasser Medical Complex in the south of Gaza, an hospital which is also overwhelmed, but there they can get better treatments and definitely better treatment than in Al-Ahli. And for information, I mean, when we did an assessment, we probably could have taken 30 or 40% of the patients if you look at the criticality of it. The journey was extremely dangerous, and it was delayed during military checkpoint and detention of health partners. And this is what I say, on the way north, the UN convoy was inspected at the Wadi Gaza checkpoints, and ambulance and crew members had to leave the vehicles for identification, exposing them to risk. 2 of the PRCS staff were detained for over an hour, and we had to wait there, further delaying the missions. And we witnessed that one of the staff was being made to kneel at gunpoint and taken out of sight. Finally, he returned, and we could move on as well. I also want to mention that as WHO, we have an obligation to monitor, analyze, and report on attacks on healthcare. So one of the truck carrying medical supplies and one of the ambulances were hit by bullets, actually, on the way entering Gaza. On the way south, and this is much more serious, etc., again, with the patients from Al-Ahli, then the convoy was again stopped at the Wadi Gaza checkpoint. PRCS staff and most of the patients had to leave the ambulances for security checks. And critical patients remaining in the ambulance were all searched by armed soldiers. Now, one of the same 2 PRCS staff temporarily detained earlier on the way in was taken for interrogation on a second time. We waited, and we made numerous attempts to coordinate his release. We waited, and we tried, and through all our channels in Jerusalem, and eventually, after 2.5 hours, you had to make this incredibly difficult choice. To leave this highly dangerous area and proceed for the safety and well-being of the patients, but of course also from the humanitarian workers ourselves. The PRCS staff member, colleague, was released later that night after the joint UN efforts, and we interviewed him yesterday at Al-Aqsa Hospital. And his story is harrowing, and the humiliation and inhumane treatments he was subject to is rather shocking. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And maybe just on a related note, I draw your attention, colleagues, to the latest update from UNRWA, which was published yesterday. It contains figures as of the 10th of December, this past Sunday, among other things, and notes that very sadly that to date 134 UNRWA colleagues have been killed in Gaza, and it cites a number of 1.1 million IDPs sheltering in 97 UNRWA facilities in the Middle and Khan Yunis and in Rafah areas. So do take a look at that UNRWA update. Okay, we'll take a question now from John Zaracostas. John, over to you.
Yes, good morning, Rick. I was wondering if you have the figures for the number of children that have had their limbs amputated. We keep on seeing children's limbs being amputated, endless reports by your partners on the ground?
I think it's a very good question, and I think we discussed it even this morning. In Philip Lazzarini was here, the head of an UNRWA, and one of the UNICEF colleagues, of course, also stressed everything around children, and we need to get better granularity on this. So I cannot give you the updates. We need to get a better overview, and we need to do that swiftly at WHO together with UNICEF to make a better assessment, and that we can indeed get back to this kind of questions. What we see, of course, we see among the fatalities an enormous amounts of women and children, over 60%, and also among the injuries. So it's definitely issues. Unfortunately, I cannot answer this more specifically now.
Thank you very much, Rick. I just take note there are a couple of questions in the chat, but maybe we'll get to those in a minute. I understand that Christian is sending notes in by email, but we'll turn now to Lisa Schlein, Voice of America. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you, Rolando. Good morning, and good morning, Dr. Pieperkorn. Thank you for all this. I'd like to know whether you believe that, whether you feel secure that the hospitals in the South, where the conflict has now primarily shifted, are safe from bombing, whether the Israelis are and will be respecting the particular status of the hospitals. And also, since the conflict seems to have shifted from the north to the south, do you see more people returning to the north because the areas in which safety, so-called, exist in the south are getting smaller and smaller and smaller? And I don't know. I mean, there's a break. I mean, you've reached the breaking point in many cases, but perhaps you could talk about your view of the situation. Thank you.
Yeah, on my observations and what we get around, I don't see many people moving up north, because I think even when I can recall our mission up north to Al-Ahli Hospital, yeah, extremely dangerous. So I don't see many people moving up north. I see many people moving down south. And for example, in the middle area, Deir Bala, I know that place very well. And when we had to drive the truck to Deir Bala on the way to Al-Ahli, and I've never seen such big crowds in that place. Everywhere we were completely swarmed with people when we drove through Deir Bala. And every time, of course, we had to say that these were medications, this was dawa, and it was meant for Al-Ahli Hospital, because many people thought that maybe there's food or water, etc. And we would be in big problems actually in among these crowds. So what we see more and more people coming in this area, in the Rafah area. As I said, Rafah is everywhere. Everywhere you see shelters and makeshift shelters around. On the hospital situation, I think WHO has been very clear on this. We before the crisis, Gaza had 3,500 beds. And I want to stress again, a reasonable functional health system, producing health indicators at par with its neighboring countries. So people say, oh, the health sector was always very bad. No, that is not true. Yes, there were issues on quality and in primary healthcare. Yes, mental health should be much more addressed. Yeah, there were some specialties lacking, which we were trying to assist to get a cancer center within Gaza. And we know that that was not yet happening. And an average 50 to 100 patients need to be referred to East Jerusalem and the West Bank a day, and 40% of that were cancer related. But it was a functional health system with a lot of, despite all the challenges and all the issues they were going through. 3,500 beds. I think we are now probably down we always say number 1,500. We must be less now, although we are adding beds. The health system is adding beds in the south. I can say, like, am I concerned? Yes, WHO is very concerned, and that's why I think the whole protection of health and healthcare and healthcare facilities is so much reflected in everything WHO does and brings out. We cannot afford to lose any more hospital beds, and the south is now the backbone of the health system. We need to get at least 2 functional hospitals running in the north as well. And I really want to make a plea for, of course, not only Al-Ahli Hospital, but also Shifa. Shifa is still barely functional, but it is functional. The infrastructure is there. It used to be the backbone, the best referral hospital in Gaza. That needs to be functional again, because there's still many people in the north. Estimations range from everything from 2 to 600,000 or something like that. In the south, the 2 most important hospitals are Nasser Medical Complex with all the specialization, and the European Gaza Hospital. Now, all the other hospitals are, I would say, let's say they're made more first-level referral hospitals. Every hospital needs to expand its bed capacities, and that's why we're trying to get EMT, emergency medical teams, in to help expand the bed capacity and probably an estimation now there's 1,400 beds. Already you're in both in Nasser, they expanded it with another 100 beds. I mean, next to the hospital, as I said, we have a number of field hospitals and EMTs coming in. That is a hopeful sign. European Gaza Hospital is currently being expanded through the assistance of ICRC. The issue is we cannot afford to lose any health facility and hospital, nor, I want to stress, primary healthcare facilities. We need to expand, and we need to expand the bed capacity, and we need to restore the functionality of the system. We need to get it back from its knees, etc., standing up again. Now, are we concerned? Yes, we are concerned. We hope that we plead that this will not happen, and that an incredibly vulnerable health infrastructure will be left intact, and that we can actually expand on that. We hear very concerning stories about siege and attacks on Kamal Adwan Hospital and Al-Adwan Hospital. We get calls as well to assist with evacuation of patients there and of staff, etc. We again want to call out health facilities and healthcare should be protected, can never be a target. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Rick. I know that you're a bit pressed for time, but if we could we have still 2 hands up. If could you stay with us just a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. This way, we'll just, if you don't mind, Agnes and Isabel, if you can, maybe we'll pose your questions back to back to save time. But just before we take your questions, Rick, I think there was a need to clarify whether the delays were at the Israeli checkpoints. That's one clarification. And then John is asking whether you said 18,209 killed and 49,645 injured. So maybe if you could address that quickly, and then we'll take the questions.
Yeah, sorry, I just got a call. Sorry.
Okay, not to worry. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So the question was on what was happening and the delays on the checkpoint. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. Whether it was please to clarify whether it was indeed an Israeli checkpoint, a military checkpoint, not something else.
Oh yeah, definitely it was Israeli military, and I think it was an Israeli military checkpoint, and this is what makes it. And I think I made that point in the beginning. The humanitarian actors, including WHO, we are here to assist, and we want to assist much better because we are only scratching the minimum. We need to assist in a much more effective way, and it is incredibly complex to actually organize these missions. I mean, everything needs to be notified, deconflicted, etc. And it becomes very difficult to move safely and swiftly, if it is supplies or patients or staff, etc. And then when you get these delays, because, for example, we had plans to stay at least 2 hours, 2.5, 3 hours at the hospitals. That was our plan. We only had 15 minutes left because we needed to get back to the military checkpoint by 4 p.m. That was because of all the delays, and including, of course, the delays because first on the detention going in, the temporary detention going in, and definitely the detention going out, which took a long time. I tell you, going out more than 2.5 hours, that process. And again, want to say one more thing about that and attacks on health. This, of course, reported to us. We only could observe part of this. But when we interviewed the PSCS person the next day, so he informed us that he was harassed, beaten, threatened, and even stripped of his uniform, blindfolded, hands tied behind his back, and treated in a degrading and a humiliating manner. And once released, he had to walk towards the south with his hands still tied, and with a t-shirt only and no shoes. And there he could make a call and get his colleagues from PSCS in on the other side, and then they collected him like that. And I think this is an issue. This is not the first time we see delays and detentions. And I want to remind everyone that 3 weeks after that was on the mission where WHO also led mission, where we brought supplies in to Shifa and helped to refer and bring patients to a more safer place down south. That was on 18 November. And the whereabouts of 4 people, and were 3 of the Ministry of Health and 1 PRCS staff, which were detained on that trip. They're still unknown. And of course, the PSCS is raising this with us, and the Ministry of Health is raising this with us, and I'm sure with many other ones. Their families are deeply concerned, their colleagues are deeply concerned, and there's no updates from them since then. There's no updates on their whereabouts, etc. And yeah, that's simply unacceptable. And we are deeply concerned about that. So we hope to get updates on the whereabouts of these 4 people, 3 from the Ministry of Health and 1 PRCS staff. Over to you.
Thanks, Rich. And I know I'm mindful of the time, and I know that you're a bit pressed. So please put your hand up when you've got to go. But we do have 4 virtual hands that just popped up. Maybe we can just take 2 and then 2 very quickly. Colleagues, if you could just pose your question briefly. Agnes from AFP, and then Isabel from Spanish News Agency. Go ahead, Agnes.
Yes, hi everybody. Hi, Dr. Peppercorn. It's a question actually on the Kamal Adwan Hospital that you mentioned earlier. A bit earlier this morning, the health ministry of the Hamas said that the Israeli forces were raiding these hospitals. And we would like you to ask if you could explain if you have any what is going on now in the hospital, and if you have information of how many patients there are still there, and if there are other kind of people inside trapped maybe. So any information you have about what is going on and who is inside. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Agnes. Okay, Isabel, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. You said that the Shifa hospital is barely functioning, and I would like to know exactly what is the situation there, how many staff and patients are there still been there, and what is needed for the Shifa hospital to work again more or less in a more functionally and effective way. Thank you.
Over to you, Doctor.
Okay, by the way, I realized I forgot the answer for one question on the numbers. And yes, the numbers I mentioned were what's of course reported to us: 18,205 fatalities, 11 December, and 49,645 injuries. And I think from the fatalities, I think we reported as well reported over 60% women and children. Now, on the question on Kamal Adwan and actually Al Adwa, we get similar concerning reports on a siege, attack, etc. We know Kamal Adwan has a limited number of patients left. That's what we get reported. So we haven't been able to access that hospital. I want to be very clear. That's what we get reported. Limited number of patients. I heard something like 20, but cannot confirm that. And staff. And to say what we hear about Al Adwa. Yeah, we heard about fights in the courtyard, etc. This is again reported. We cannot, we don't have it confirmed. What we get, and just going to my yes. So it's a Kamal Adwan, 20 critical ill patients, including 6 babies on incubators. This is what I just get in now, and the hospital has also sustained damages from 8 December, when it was the power generators. Actually were hit. So we call this hospital as minimal functioning. And I think there is an update from the Ministry of Health. That's all reported. So this is all reported information. The same on Al Adwa. What we now get a request. We get a request WHO to assist with a possible evacuation of patients and staff. We will consider that. We will discuss this, of course, with our PRCS partners. We cannot do that alone, but we can only do this when this is properly managed. We cannot afford, I mean, like other missions, like we went through to Al-Ahli or the one we went to Shifa. We cannot afford that because simply our partners, our key partner PRCS, so nobody can be detained when they are part of a medical mission. Yeah, we cannot, of course, we cannot afford any delays on these missions. We have to really carefully plan this well, what and how, and yeah, how we can manage that. So we will look into that, and I'm sure we'll update you over the coming days. Oh, and Shifa, yeah, the Shifa question again. So we have to report that Shifa is, again, we call barely functional, that some of the dialysis patients are back at Shifa. And from the technical point of view, this was, of course, the most important referral hospital. A lot of the infrastructure there is still functional. Now, there are still some staff. And if it would be, so you ask, how could it be operational again? Of course, first, it needs to be safe around Shifa. That's one thing. But why do we stress it is so much needed? Because there's still many, many people in the north. At the moment, there's only Al-Ahli Hospital, which is, as I described, completely, utterly overwhelmed. I've never seen something like that. And then you have the other barely functional hospitals, which we just discussed. So Shifa is, of course, the best option to start functioning again and to expand health services in North for the people most in need. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Rick. Okay, we'll take the last 2 questions. So we'll start with Ruth Eglesh of Fox News. Go ahead, Ruth.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for holding this. So I'm very curious about the numbers that you just quoted of 18,205, and especially with such chaos and such uncertainty as you described in the hospitals and in the health system. How can you confirm that these numbers are reliable? I know that in the past conflicts in 2014, the death count was more or less accurate, but now we're seeing a war on the size and scale that we haven't seen in previous conflicts. And we know that, many people have moved to the south. We know, as you mentioned, many of the hospitals, especially in the north, are not operating as they should. And even the officials who were trained and were keeping good track of the numbers are no longer available, either were arrested or unfortunately were killed. So I wondered if you could explain how you're calculating those figures and how you are certain that they are accurate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Okay, last question from Su Jingming of China Media Group.
Thanks very much for taking my questions. I know that the WHO Executive Board adopted a resolution on last Sunday, and does it make possible to facilitate, for example, the rebuild the medical infrastructure as more hospitals, as you said, that are partially functional? Thank you.
Yeah, let me first try to address the first questions. This is complex, and thanks for that. I think Ruth it was on the numbers. So I think as WHO got a lot of questions on the numbers. I think from the start, and again I want to report until a number of weeks ago. So how does WHO? How do we take this number in? So WHO, of course, we rely in any conflicts and on everywhere around the world, we rely on figures from the Ministry of Health, everywhere. And WHO does assessments of health information systems, the so-called SCORE assessments, and they do that every 2 years, I believe. And Palestine, occupied Palestinian territory, if it's the West Bank or Gaza, East Jerusalem, they score very high on that, very well. And in our own assessments in the past as well, the vital statistics, death, birth, etc., was always very well managed in Palestine. So that's actually one. Maybe you can recall. And secondly, I think also on other areas of the health information system, for example, the vaccination coverage or in the time of COVID, etc. Palestine actually produced very reliable data and very good figures. And a number of assessments have been constantly done. Maybe you remember it was in the start of well, not in the start, it was already, and we talked then about, what was it, 8,000 or 9,000 deaths, something like that. And it was also questions. And the Ministry of Health produced this 12-page long list with all the ID numbers and all the details on that as well. Now, when the conflicts or let's say this crisis is ongoing until a couple of weeks ago, and want to make two other points on this. In every former escalation of conflicts, the figures reported when they were assessed after the conflict, they were more or less correct. They often were actually a little bit underestimated instead of overestimated. Even if you look at the number of UN staff killed and extrapolate on that, you come almost to the similar type of figures. The last point I want to make on this, the Lancet made a very good, and you should really look at that, and I'm sure that my colleague Stefan will share that with you. They did an assessment, I think it was 10 days ago, and they analyzed these figures as well. And they come to the conclusion that these figures are unfortunately pretty much correct. And again, I can only describe how WHO works and how we work in our countries. Now, we already made a point that the Ministry of Health as well, in the last couple of weeks, it becomes indeed impossible. The system of reporting deaths and fatalities and the health information system, unfortunately, and all their data servers, which were all in the north, collapsed. And they made a point that since that time, since a couple of weeks, they're making estimations of this. They don't even include the number of people, children, women, and men under the rubble. Now, based on all of this, including the Lancet's analysis and assessment, I'm afraid to say that these figures are most likely pretty correct, and they might even be an underestimation. I cannot say. So that's probably all what I can say about how WHO is taking time working in all countries around the world. I try to describe a little bit that process and well, including indeed the Lancet analysis and report on this topic as well. Please have a look at that and draw the conclusion for yourself. On the last point, I didn't get the full questions. It was a system, and I think I understand a system on functionality, etc. So again, if I'm correct, I didn't get the specific question.
Perhaps our colleague from CMG, if you could perhaps restate your question, because I took notes, but I couldn't quite make it out myself. Go ahead.
Okay. So WHO Executive Board adopted a resolution last Sunday. So does it make possible to facilitate, to rebuild, for example, the medical infrastructure as more hospitals are partially functional? So does it make possible to facilitate all the rebuild of the medical infrastructures? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, of course. That's based on information we receive on the ground. And of course, it's always it's difficult to qualify when do you call an hospital partially functional or barely functional, etc. But what we get now from Kamal Adwan, for example, and from other places, you can only call it barely functional, or reports from Shifa, you can only call it barely functional. And hardly any hospitals is what I would say fully functional. I was really impressed maybe yesterday with my visit to Al-Aqsa hospital in the middle area. Also completely overwhelmed. So everyone has 300% bed capacity, etc. But still, a number of their units were working as you would expect in a normal functional hospital. The ICU was really well protected, etc. And you should still see there was order. There was order there was no chaos. I mean, Al-Ahli Hospital completely overwhelmed, and unfortunately utter chaos because of that. Limited staff, completely overwhelmed in what was needed. We get, of course, all the information. We have a whole team on the ground. We do all these missions always with WHO staff whenever we deliver essential medical supplies. And we make it everywhere a quick assessment as good as possible. For the rest, of course, we have a lot of contact with the health workers, which we have worked with for decades, and we will continue to do so. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Rick. Much appreciated, as always, for sharing this update. As grim as it is, it's important that you do so with our colleagues here in Geneva. So I'd like to thank you once again. Stay safe, and thanks again, and you're always welcome back here. We still have Christian online, and I know that Christian wanted to address a particular point. So over to you, Christian. I know that there are also a few questions that are pending in the chat, perhaps. So if you could address those, if possible. Over to you, Christian.
All right. Well, originally I thought I want to read out the main statement, but I think now in a second part, Dr. Peperkorn actually elaborated on it. So I don't want to repeat what was said. Hence, just let me know if you think I should pick this up or whether it's been taken care of. That's for our friends here.
I would say, I think Dr. Peperkorn was very comprehensive, so I addressed, I think, many of the points that you want to address. But let's say if colleagues have any pending questions, any details that need to be clarified, please, you can either pose them now to Christian or online bilaterally afterwards. I think there was one question about if it was Kamal Adwan Hospital that was referred to. If I'm not mistaken, there's a question there, but yeah, perhaps we could liaise with colleagues. If you can liaise with Christian directly, that would perhaps be the best way to pursue this.
Because
Okay.
John's question was addressed, the names of the two hospitals I don't have at my hand right now, and I agree, Rolando. I think and I should not add now more than what he said. Again, I think that the statement was taken care of. I think that for now covers it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Christian. Appreciate you being here as well. And maybe just staying on subject, again, to remind you of the updates we continue to share with you, including their UNRWA update, with some updated statistics that we shared with you yesterday, as well as the usual OCHA update, which comes out on a daily basis. Please do consult that for the latest figures on the difficult situation in the OPT. So I think that is it for our briefers, but before we conclude, I just have a few updates. As noted, the reason why we're doing this virtual, it's obviously to ease all our work, namely because of the big event taking place here in Geneva, the Human Rights 75th, Universal Declaration of Human Rights 75th anniversary events. You will have received the statements of the High Commissioner earlier today. He addressed the opening of the high-level event this morning with several dignitaries. Do consult the updates shared with you by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. In terms of the Secretary General, as you well know, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres is currently in Dubai, where he's attending the COP. Now, he did speak with your colleagues of the press yesterday, where he did say that now is the time for maximum ambition and maximum flexibility. He urged ministers and negotiators to move beyond the arbitrary red lines, entrenched positions, and blocking tactics to come up with a meaningful result of the COP meeting. The COP wraps up today, and the Secretary General will remain in Dubai for the closing today. I just wanted to point out just a couple of other statements that we shared with you, or rather one in particular on South Sudan, an issue which we have focused on in the past, and we certainly want to keep that sharp focus on the very difficult situation in South Sudan, specifically the violence in Abyei. Members of the Security Council, and this is the statement from the Security Council that we shared with you, members of the Security Council strongly condemn the violence in Warab State in South Sudan and southern Abyei administrative area that has claimed approximately 75 lives in November last month and 10 lives already this month. So very worrying situation in South Sudan. So do take a look at that statement. I should note that the Security Council later today in New York is actually holding a public meeting at 3 p.m. New York time on the situation in Sudan and South Sudan. I also wanted to just highlight a statement that we shared with you yesterday. It was from the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Binta Keita, on the Democratic Republic of Congo, on the MONUSCO mandate, the UN peacekeeping operation. So that was a statement that she delivered to the Security Council, which we shared with you. In terms of meetings, no Human Rights Treaty body meetings taking place this week. Of course, the Human Rights 75th event, HR 75 event is taking place, started yesterday and continues today. Another big meeting happening tomorrow, which you well know about, is the Global Refugee Forum, which will take place at Palexpo here in Geneva. And it's taking place from tomorrow through Friday. It's convened by 5 states, namely Colombia, France, Japan, Jordan, and Uganda, and co-hosted by the Swiss government. You have a lot of information at your disposal on the GRF. In terms of press conferences, we have 2 press conferences today. One taking place in about an hour and a half from now at 1 p.m. from the permanent mission of Israel. There's a stakeout. The Ambassador Meirav Aylan Shahar, the permanent representative of Israel to the United Nations in Geneva, will be speaking at 1 p.m. at this stakeout located behind room 20. And then at that same location at 6:30, approximately 6:30 this evening, we have the High Commissioner of Human Rights, Volker Turk, who will share some closing remarks with you at the end of this 2-day high-level event marking the 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. One last press conference I wanted to flag is that, which is taking place on Thursday, the 14th of December at 10:30 in connection with the Global Refugee Forum. It's taking place at Palexpo. It's the European Union press conference at 10:30 at Palexpo, and it's about the EU resettlement pledge for 2024-2025. And we have the EU Commissioner for Home Affairs, Ylva Johansson, who will be briefing you there at Thursday at 10:30. And that is all I have. If you have questions for me, I have a couple of hands up. John, go ahead.
Yes, it's a logistical question to Christian. I was wondering, Christian, if Dr. Tedros will be addressing the high-level meeting of the Human Rights Council on the 75th anniversary today, given the attacks on health is front and center on the world stage, and the right to health is one of the core rights of human rights. And secondly, if he's planning to hold a bilateral meeting with the Secretary General in Geneva tomorrow concerning the situation in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I don't have any info on that. I will need to check and get back to you.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that, Christian. Lisa, please.
Thanks. Christian, I'm putting you on the hot seat again. In reference to what I just saw in the chat, if you could please elaborate on the situation in the Kamal Adwan Hospital. And the chat says that it's forcefully being evacuated. Could you elaborate upon this? Why is that happening? Since when? Is it happening right now? And what are the consequences for the patients and the staff that are inside the hospital? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. I don't have much more than what I put in the chat because that's what we received as Dr. Papercorn was speaking. He was obviously talking about Kamal Adwan as well, and as he was speaking, we received that the Ministry of Health is reporting just now that the hospital is being forcefully evacuated. There are currently 68 patients inside the hospital, 18 intensive care unit patients, and including 6 neonates. That's all I have. That's reports from the Ministry of Health, which I'm just forwarding basically here. What that means, it means just that another one of these unnecessary and evacuations, and it's again putting another hospital out of use. It's again putting the last patients who need help out on the street. So yes, but again, I cannot comment really on this as these are figures that just came in.
I think Lisa, is there a quick follow-up? And John as well, but Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, there is. Could you remind me, what are there 2 functioning or barely functioning hospitals in northern Gaza right now? I've forgotten. And also has this particular hospital been under siege in the past? Is there any indication that Hamas is somehow or other implicated in this situation? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Lisa. I won't add much on what Dr. Papercorn just now. This would have been great to ask him. So he reported that we have 1 partially functioning hospital in the north and 10 in the south, if I listened well. And again, the important word here in this is partially functioning. There's nothing that is fully functioning as we would need it. He also elaborated that we've been talking normally about 1,500 beds available, although that is a fluctuating figure as well, and that the need is much higher, of course, way higher than the 3,500 beds we used to have in Gaza before the hostilities, before the war. Now with injuries, with trauma, with amputations, with war wounds, the needs are multiplied. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Christian. I'm sorry, you're not off the hook just yet. I know, John, you have a question, but there is Agnes poses a question. If you can clarify from what hospital did you get a request for help for evacuation, and when exactly did you get that? I don't know if you have insight on that.
So that's the Kamal Adwan hospital we're talking about. So I put it in the chat as well. It's an update that the Ministry of Health gives on the Kamal Adwan hospital just now. And that's all I have right now. That means I have no further update on what requests, what's going on. That's the only update I have on top of what Dr. Peeperkorn has just said.
Okay, sorry, just last two questions. If you stay with us another minute, John and Nina, if you can do them together.
Hi, Christian. It could be helpful for us if the emergencies unit of WHO could provide us with a list of the hospitals and health facilities that have had to be evacuated because of orders by the IDF forces. That would be helpful for us because we're getting lost in all these numbers by name and the date and the amount of patients that were forced to be relocated. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well noted, John. And yes, but mind you, this is also a fluctuating thing, right? Sometimes a hospital gets evacuated, then they're allowed to run a ward again, and then it gets again evacuated. So this is the way I understand. There are very few absolute numbers here, but yes, I'll put that forward.
Thank you so much, Christian. And then just last comment or a question, perhaps Nina. I suppose that's also for Christian. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to clarify. So I think Agnes was asking about a comment made by Dr. Peeperkorn saying that WHO had received a request for assistance to evacuate from what we understood. And we were wondering from what hospital that was, if you could clarify that. And then also on Kamal Adwan, I was wondering, I've seen that it was functioning as a maternity hospital, and that there are mothers who may have been also killed in bombings there, if that's something that you've heard, and what your reaction to that might be as well. Thank you.
Yeah, on the second part, I have no further information to what I just shared or what the Peeperkorn shared on the hospital which she talked about. I'll need to check back to be absolutely sure.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much, Christian. Of course, we will continue to update you on all these figures as we have been doing. So thank you very, very much for joining us, all of you, and special thanks to Dr. Peeperkorn and Christian. We will return to the hybrid format on Friday for the next regular briefing. Until then, have a good afternoon and good rest of your week. Thank you.
Recording stopped.